One man stood on top of a mountain facing down an entire kingdom. His name was Elijah, and arrayed against him were 450 prophets, the entire religious establishment of the nation, backed by a corrupt king and queen. This was the ultimate spiritual showdown. The challenge was audacious, almost unthinkable. One prophet of the living God against hundreds of priests of a false god. The question they would settle that day was simple. Who was real and who was a lie? To understand this moment, you have to see the nation of Israel. It was in a deep crisis. A terrible drought had gripped the land for 3.5 years. The fields were dust, the rivers were dry, and the people were starving. The reason for the drought was spiritual. The king, a man named Ahab, and his wife, Queen Jezebel, had turned the entire nation away from God. They built temples to a false god named Baal, who was supposed to be the god of rain and storms. But for years, the sky had been silent. So Elijah brought this crisis to a head on Mount Carmel. He gathered King Ahab, the 450 prophets of Baal, and the people of Israel. He stood before them and asked a question that cut to the heart of their problem. How long will you waver between two opinions? He laid out the terms of the contest. They were simple and undeniable. 2 altars would be built, and 2 bulls prepared as sacrifices. The prophets of Baal would pray to their God, and Elijah would pray to his. The rule was clear. No one could light a fire. The God who answered by sending fire from heaven to consume the sacrifice, he would be recognized as the one true God. The people saw the fairness in it. This was a test nobody could argue with. The 450 prophets of Baal went first. They took their bull, prepared it on their altar, and began to call on the name of Baal. They started in the morning, a massive crowd of men chanting and shouting to the sky. Hour after hour they cried out. They danced. They leaped around the altar in a frenzy. They pleaded for Baal to send the fire to prove he was real, to end the shame of a silent heaven. The sun climbed higher in the sky. But nothing happened. There was no voice from the sky. There was no flash of lightning. There was no answer at all. Just the sound of 450 desperate voices echoing in an empty, silent sky. Their God was not listening. As the hours drag on, Elijah starts to talk. He begins to mock the 450 prophets of Baal. He tells them to shout louder. He suggests maybe their God is busy or thinking about something else. He even jokes that maybe their God is traveling, or perhaps he's just asleep and needs to be woken up. This wasn't just simple trash talk. It was a brilliant move, designed to break their spirit and expose the silence of their God to the watching crowd. Pushed by Elijah's words and their own growing desperation, the scene turns dark. The prophets of Baal begin to cut themselves. They use swords and spears, a ritual to get their God's attention. Blood begins to flow down the mountain. They are in a frenzy, shouting, bleeding, and pleading, but from the sky, there is nothing. No voice, no answer, only an awful, empty silence. Then, it's Elijah's turn. The mood on the mountain shifts completely. He doesn't build a new, fancy altar. Instead, he finds the Lord's altar, which had been torn down, and begins to repair it. He carefully takes 12 stones, one for each of the tribes of Israel. This wasn't just construction. It was a powerful message to the divided nation. He was acting to bring God's people back together. But then Elijah does something that makes no sense. He tells the people to bring him 4 large jars of water. Remember, they are in the middle of a terrible drought. Water was more precious than gold. He has them pour all of it over his sacrifice and the wood on the altar. Then he tells them to do it a second time, and then a third time. Water soaks everything, filling a trench he dug around the altar. He was making an impossible situation even more impossible. With the sun setting, Elijah steps forward. There is no shouting, no frantic dancing. He simply speaks to God. His prayer is short, calm, and incredibly direct. He doesn't beg. He asks. He asks the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to let everyone know this day that He is the one true God. He asks God to turn the hearts of the people back to Him. It was a prayer of total confidence, a simple request from a servant to his king. And in that quiet moment, the entire history of a nation hung in the balance, waiting for an answer. With the crowd watching, Elijah calmly rebuilt the Lord's altar. He took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes of Israel. This wasn't just about building a place for a sacrifice. It was a physical reminder to a nation that had forgotten who they were. He was rebuilding their history, stone by stone.
Then Elijah did something that made no sense. He turned to the people and told them to fill 4 large jars with water. Remember, the land was in its 3rd year of a crippling drought. Water was the most valuable thing they had, and he commanded them to pour it all over the sacrifice and the wood. But he wasn't finished. He said, "Do it a 2nd time." And they did. Then, do it a 3rd time. They poured 12 jars of precious water until the offering was drenched. The wood was soaked through. Water filled a trench he had dug around the altar. He had just made a difficult task completely impossible. Now, picture the contrast. For hours, 450 prophets of Baal had screamed, chanted, and cut themselves in a desperate frenzy. Their prayers were loud and long. They received no answer. Now it was Elijah's turn. He simply stepped forward. He didn't shout. He didn't perform any rituals. He just spoke to God, as if talking to a friend. His prayer was short. It was calm. It was confident. He said, "Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant." This wasn't just a prayer for fire. It was a plea for the hearts of his people. He finished by asking, "Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." He put everything on the line with that one simple request. And then, it happened. Fire fell from the sky. This wasn't a normal lightning strike. It was a column of divine flame, a supernatural event that broke all the rules of the natural world. It descended directly onto the altar on Mount Carmel. The fire was absolute. It didn't just burn the wet sacrifice. It instantly consumed the waterlogged wood. It vaporized the 12 heavy stones of the altar itself. It even burned up the very dust and soil beneath it. The result was undeniable. That trench he had dug, which was filled to the brim with water, the fire licked it completely dry. Every last drop was gone. In one terrifying, awesome moment, God provided an answer that left zero room for doubt. When the people saw it, they broke. The entire crowd fell flat on their faces, their foreheads pressed to the ground in awe and terror. And from thousands of throats, a single cry rose up, echoing across the mountain. "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" The nation's spiritual amnesia was shattered in an instant. The spiritual battle was won. But the physical problem remained. For 3.5 years, no rain had fallen on the land. The ground was cracked and dead. So Elijah didn't celebrate. He went back to the top of Mount Carmel, put his face between his knees, and began to pray. The showdown was over. The quiet work had just begun. He sent his servant to go look out toward the sea. The servant went and came back. Nothing. Elijah told him, "Go again." This happened 7 times. 7 trips to look at an empty, brassy sky. On the 7th try, the servant came back with news. He saw a cloud, but it was tiny, as small as a man's hand. That was all Elijah needed to hear. The drought was about to break. King Ahab raced back to his palace and told Queen Jezebel everything he had seen. the fire from heaven, the end of the drought, the power of Elijah's God. You would expect this to change her. It didn't. Her response wasn't awe. It was fury. She sent a messenger to Elijah with a chilling threat. By this time tomorrow, you will be just as dead as the prophets you killed. After the greatest miracle came the greatest danger. You would think a miracle like that would change everything. Fire from the sky, a nation on its knees. But when King Ahab goes home and tells his wife, Queen Jezebel, what happened on Mount Carmel, she isn't in awe. She isn't convinced. She is furious. She sends a messenger to Elijah with a chilling promise. By this time tomorrow, you will be just as dead as the prophets I served. The man who stood alone against 450 opponents, the man who called down fire from heaven, did something nobody expected. He ran. The threat from one angry woman terrified him more than an entire army of false prophets. The highest of highs was followed by the lowest of lows. He was completely and utterly afraid for his life. His journey took him south, away from the kingdom and into the wilderness. This wasn't the crowded mountain anymore. This was a vast, empty desert. He traveled a full day's journey into the barren land, leaving his servant behind, pushing himself deeper into total isolation. One man, alone with his fear, under an endless sky. He finally collapsed under a small broom tree, the only shade for miles. And there he prayed a desperate prayer. He asked God to just let him die. He felt like a complete failure. He believed he was no better than his ancestors, and that his work had amounted to nothing. It was a moment of total burnout and despair.
But God's response wasn't a lecture. It was an act of quiet care. As Elijah slept, an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." Beside him was a cake of bread baked on hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again, exhausted. The angel came a second time, providing for him in his darkest moment. That simple meal was a miracle in itself. Strengthened by that food, Elijah traveled for 40 days and 40 nights without any other food or water. He journeyed all the way to Horeb, the mountain of God. This was the same sacred ground where Moses had met with God centuries before. He found a cave and spent the night there. In the deep silence of that holy place, a question came to him. It was the voice of God. And it was simple. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" It wasn't an accusation. It was an invitation for the prophet to voice the pain he was carrying. Elijah poured out his heart. He told God how passionately he had served him, how the people had rejected the covenant, torn down the altars, and killed the other prophets. He felt completely alone, the last one left, and now his life was being hunted too. It was a raw, honest complaint from a broken man. God told him to go and stand on the mountain. Then, a powerful wind tore through the mountains, shattering rocks. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind came an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, just like the one on Mount Carmel. But the Lord was not in the fire. After all the noise, the chaos, and the destructive power, there was a gentle whisper, a still, small voice, and in that quiet sound, Elijah recognized the presence of God. The greatest power wasn't in the storm or the fire. It was in the quiet that could heal a prophet's soul